I inherited $2.3 million from a brother I hadn't spoken to in 40 years, and I didn't breathe a word of it to anyone. 2 weeks later, my son-in-law looked up from his phone at the dinner table and said it was probably time we started talking about a timeline for my next steps. I thanked him for the pot roast, excused myself very quietly, and went to bed. By the following Tuesday, I had retained an attorney, established a trust, and set in motion a plan that not one person in that house ever saw coming. Good evening, dear friends. It's Lula. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Please stay all the way through, because the end of this story is where the real thing lives. And wherever you're listening from, leave me a comment. I mean it. It makes the world feel smaller in the best possible way. My name is Myrna Ashby. I was 68 years old the night my son-in-law decided, between the pot roast and the green beans, that my time had run out. Let me tell it from the beginning, because the beginning is the only honest place to start. My husband Lou and I were married for 41 years. He was a civil engineer, a quiet man who made terrible puns at breakfast and kept a bird feeder in every yard we ever lived in. We raised our daughter in a brick rancher in Greensboro, North Carolina, and for the most part we had a good life. Not a flashy one, a real one. Lou died 18 months before any of this happened on a Saturday morning in May, face down in the vegetable garden with a trowel still in his hand. The doctors said it was his heart. Fast. He didn't suffer. I held on to that. I still do. After the funeral, our daughter came to me with a plane ticket and an expression that meant she had already decided. She was living in Raleigh by then, a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood where everyone had Ring cameras and subscription landscaping. Her husband Mason had built a real estate appraisal business from the ground up. They were comfortable, they were busy, and my daughter said to me, "Mom, you can't rattle around in that house alone. Come stay with us, just for a while." I should have asked what a while meant. I didn't. I gave up the house in Greensboro 8 months after I moved. My daughter said keeping it empty was money going down the drain. She was technically right. I was technically a fool to listen, and I knew it even as I signed the papers. I sat in the car in the parking lot of the title company and thought about the bird feeders Lou and I had put up in the backyard the spring before he got sick. I thought about the kitchen where I had baked every birthday cake my daughter had ever had. Then I drove back to Raleigh and told no one I had cried. Their house was beautiful. 3 floors, a finished basement, a yard the landscapers kept so perfect it looked like a showroom. I was given the guest room on the 2nd floor, the one without a closet, because my son-in-law had converted it into a charging station for his equipment. There was a sign on the door that said, "Guest Suite" in block letters, which I thought was more formal than necessary for someone's mother. Those first months, I told myself I was adjusting. My son-in-law was not an unkind man. He was an efficient one, a man who ran his life like a schedule and found any disruption to that schedule subtly irritating. He worked from a home office Monday through Friday and did not like the television on before 6. He kept the thermostat at 68 and considered any deviation a problem worth addressing. These were reasonable preferences. It was his house. What I didn't have a word for was the specific way I began to disappear. There was the Tuesday night my daughter and son-in-law had dinner with another couple, and I found out when I came downstairs at 7 and found the kitchen dark and a note on the counter. Leftovers in the fridge, back by 9. There was the Saturday their son Sam had a baseball tournament, and I learned from Sam himself that it had been happening every weekend for 6 weeks. No one had mentioned it. I could have gone. I would have liked to go. There was the Thursday I heard my son-in-law on his phone in the hallway outside his office. He wasn't trying to be quiet. He just didn't think about whether I could hear. "She's fine," he said to whoever was on the other end. "She does her thing. It's a lot of extra in the house, you know?" It changes the dynamic. A pause. "Yeah, we'll figure it out." I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the guest bed and looked at my hands. I want to be honest with you about something. I was not easy. I know that. I had opinions about how the dishes were stacked, and I sometimes offered them. I made casseroles nobody had asked for. I filled silences with small talk when my son-in-law preferred silence. I was 68 years old and had spent 41 years in my own home, and I did not always know how to be a guest in my daughter's life. I held this against myself regularly. But I also knew the difference between being difficult and being invisible. And by the time I had been there a year and a half, I had become the second thing entirely. The letter came on a Wednesday. It was from an attorney's office in Portland, Oregon, a firm I had never heard of. The name on the return address was my brother Arlo's. I stood at the mailbox for a moment before I opened it. My brother and I had not spoken since 1984. We had a falling out over our mother's estate. Money, of course, the way it almost always is. And what started as a disagreement became a silence, and the silence became so long that after a while neither of us knew how to cross it. I had thought about reaching out a dozen times over the years. I never did, neither did he. He had died in February, the letter said. Prostate cancer, which he had apparently had for 3 years without telling anyone who might have told me. He had never married, no children. His estate, a house, investments, a life lived carefully and quietly, had been left, in its entirety, to me. The amount was $2.3 million. I sat down on the front steps of my daughter's house and read the letter 3 times. The neighbor's sprinklers came on. A car pulled into a driveway 2 houses down. The world continued, indifferent and ordinary, while I sat there trying to understand that my brother, who I had spent 40 years not forgiving, had apparently spent those same 40 years thinking of me. I folded the letter, put it in my cardigan pocket, and went inside. I made myself a cup of coffee. I said nothing to anyone. That was a Wednesday. The dinner happened on a Friday. My daughter had made pot roast. My son-in-law was at the table by 6:15, which was his habit. Sam, who was 10 now, was telling a long and detailed story about something that happened at recess. Their daughter Kit, 7, was arranging her peas in a line along the edge of her plate with the focused concentration of someone defusing a bomb. I was passing the rolls when my son-in-law said it. He wasn't rude. That was the thing that would stay with me. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed, just enough to take the edge off. Casual, reasonable, as if we were all on the same team, and this was just a practical question that someone had to ask eventually. Myrna, he said, I think we should probably start talking about a timeline for your next steps. He glanced at my daughter, then back at his plate. Not rushing anything. Just good to have a plan, right? My daughter looked at her fork. Sam stopped talking mid-sentence. Kit kept arranging her peas. I looked at my son-in-law. He was 44 years old, sunburned from a weekend of site visits, a man who had never once asked me what I would like for Christmas and never once thought that was strange. He was not cruel. He was simply the kind of man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was a variable to be managed. I set the basket of rolls on the table. Excuse me, I said. I got up, walked through the kitchen, picked my cardigan up off the hook by the back door, and went outside. I sat in one of the patio chairs under the pergola and looked at the sky over their perfect lawn, and I breathed. I had spent 41 years with a man who left cups of tea outside the bathroom door in the morning. 41 years in a house where I was known. And now I was sitting on a patio chair I did not own, on a lawn I was not allowed to change, listening to the sound of a dinner I had excused myself from continuing without me. I sat there for a long time. When I came back inside, the kitchen was clean and everyone had gone to their rooms. There was no knock on my door that night. No, Myrna, are you okay? No, Mom, I'm sorry, that was the wrong way to bring it up. Nothing. Which was its own kind of answer. I lay awake until nearly 3 in the morning. I thought about fear first, because it was the most honest thing. I was afraid of being alone, 68 years old and truly alone, without family in the same city, without the structure of a home I knew. I was afraid of money I had no experience managing. I was afraid of making a mistake I could not undo. And then I thought about Lou. Lou had grown up with almost nothing, the son of a textile worker in a small town in South Carolina. He had watched his parents get taken advantage of their whole lives because they were afraid to push back. He used to say, "Fear makes a good alarm bell but a terrible compass. If you let it steer, you end up somewhere you never meant to go." I thought about what I had actually seen in 18 months in that house. Not what I had told myself, not the "she's busy, and he doesn't mean it, and this is just an adjustment," the actual evidence. My son-in-law telling someone on the phone that I changed the dynamic. My daughter looking at her fork instead of at me. Nobody asking if I was all right when I walked away from the table. And now a timeline. Delivered with a please past the roll's energy, as if I were a lease coming up for renewal. I thought about what they would do if they knew about the letter in my cardigan pocket. That thought was the one that made everything clear. I reached for the notepad I keep on the nightstand, and I made a list. Step 1. Tell no one, not one word about the inheritance, not to my daughter, not to anyone. Step 2. Find an attorney who handles estates and financial privacy. Claim through a trust. My name stays out of public record. Step 3. Establish complete financial independence before anyone in this house has any idea. Step 4. Find a home, my home, a place with my name on the deed. I looked at the list. Then I added a step 5, leave sooner than they expect. That last one was new. The woman who moved into that guest room 18 months ago would have stayed until the paperwork was done, the house was found, the transition polished and considerate of everyone's feelings. But sitting in that patio chair, I had understood something. I was not obligated to make this comfortable for people who had been calculating my exit. The next morning, I was up at 6. I dressed, came downstairs, made coffee. When my son-in-law appeared at 7:15 in his work clothes, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, perfectly ordinary, perfectly pleasant. "Good morning," I said. "Morning." He poured a travel mug and left for a site visit. By 8:30, I had found 3 estate attorneys in Raleigh with strong privacy practices. I booked the first available appointment under my name and sent the attorney in Portland a reply confirming I had received the letter and would be in touch through my own counsel. The attorney I found was a woman named Ms. Draper, 50s, quick and direct, with an office full of plants and absolutely no small talk. When I sat down and told her everything, she listened without interrupting and then said, "Good. You haven't signed anything, and you haven't told anyone. That's the right order of operations. Let's talk about how to claim this cleanly." We established a trust in 2 weeks. It took another 3 to claim the inheritance, have it routed into a private account, and set up an investment structure with a financial advisor Ms. Draper referred me to, a man named Mr. Osei, patient and thorough, who walked me through every decision without making me feel like I was learning a foreign language. Which I was. But he was a good teacher. Through all of it, I kept my routines at the house. Same quiet mornings, same grocery runs, same dinners, same woman they had been overlooking for a year and a half. My daughter noticed the change before my son-in-law did. She was sharper than him, always had been. She mentioned once lightly that I seemed to be keeping a lot of appointments. I told her my doctor had referred me to a few specialists, nothing serious, the routine nuisance of being 68. She accepted this. My son-in-law noticed the week I started going out 2 or 3 times a week. He didn't ask me directly at first. He mentioned it to my daughter in their bedroom, and their bedroom shared a wall with the hallway, and the hallway carried sound. She's always out, and she's different, quieter. A pause. Something's changed. He asked me directly the following Thursday over coffee. Very relaxed, very friendly, the version of himself I saw when he was selling something. "Everything good, Myrna? Nothing concerning with the health stuff?" "Everything is fine," I said. "Just things to sort out. You know how it is." He nodded, smiled, and I watched him not believe me. That night I found that a folder I had left on the desk in my room, locked, with a small combination lock, had been moved. Not much, but enough. Someone had picked it up and set it back down without getting it open. I drove to a UPS store the next morning and had certified copies of every document shipped to Ms. Draper's office for safekeeping. Then I drove to Asheville. I had found the community through an online search 3 weeks earlier. A 55 and older development in the western part of the state, tucked against a hillside, with walking trails and a proper pool and a garden plot program for residents. The apartment I was looking at had a south-facing sunroom and a small patio that backed to a tree line. The woman who showed me around was warm and unhurried and said exactly one thing that decided it. The people here moved here on purpose. That tends to make a difference. I put down a deposit that afternoon, cash through the trust. I did not tell anyone. The confrontation happened the following Sunday. My son-in-law had invited his parents to come for dinner, which they presented as a normal family gathering. His parents were pleasant people I had always liked. They arrived at 5. We had pot roast again, which I thought was either a coincidence or a message. After dinner, when the grandchildren had gone upstairs, my son-in-law cleared his throat and said he wanted to bring something up, as a family, because he cared about getting things right. What followed was a careful and well-organized presentation of concern. He spoke mostly, with my daughter nodding alongside him. They were worried, they said. I had been distracted. I was meeting with attorneys and advisors, and they didn't know who these people were or what I was being told. They had heard, from some contact of my son-in-law's in the real estate world, that there might be an inheritance involved. They just wanted to make sure I was protected, that I wasn't being taken advantage of, that I wasn't making decisions in a vacuum when I had family right here who could help. My son-in-law's mother looked at me with genuine worry. His father had a fixed, uncomfortable expression, the look of a man who knew this dinner had an agenda but had agreed to attend anyway. I let my son-in-law finish. Then I put my napkin on the table and said, calmly, I appreciate the concern. Truly. But I want to be straightforward with you because I think straightforward is what this moment deserves. I looked at his parents. I looked at my daughter. Then I looked at my son-in-law. I have come into some money. I am not going to tell you how much. I have an estate attorney I trust and a financial advisor I trust, and I have made careful legal decisions that are entirely in order. I paused. What I won't be doing is submitting those decisions to a family review. I'm 68 years old. I've been managing my own life longer than some people at this table have been alive. My son-in-law's jaw tightened. Mom. My daughter's voice was small and something in it was genuine, which made it harder. I'm your daughter. I'm not the enemy here. I know, I said. And I meant it. But you sat at a table 2 weeks ago while your husband told me it was time to think about my next steps, and you looked at your fork, and you didn't knock on my door that night. I was not angry when I said this. I was just telling the truth. The time for this conversation was then. What's happening right now is something different. My son-in-law said, very quietly, we're trying to help you. You're trying to know, I said. There's a difference. I thanked his parents for coming, said good night to the grandchildren when they came back through, and went to my room and finished packing a bag. The next morning, I put the bag in my car, wrote a short note for my daughter. I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while. The room is clean. I'll be in touch, and drove to the extended stay hotel I had already booked on the other side of the city. I checked in. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at my shoes and thought, I am 68 years old and I am in a hotel room and I am free. I stayed at the hotel for 11 days. On the 12th, I drove to Asheville and walked into my apartment with a set of keys that had my name on the lease. I put Lou's reading chair by the window in the living room. It looked like it had always been there. I stood in the middle of my own kitchen for a long moment and did not speak. I didn't need to. My friend Roxanne drove up from Greensboro that first weekend. We had known each other since our children were in elementary school together, and she was the only person on earth who had known everything. The letter, the attorney, all of it. She walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back, the way she always does when she is deciding how she feels about something. At the end, she stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the tree line and said, Lou would have had opinions about that bird feeder situation. He would have had a solution by Tuesday, I said. We sat on the patio until dark with iced tea and didn't need to say much else. My daughter called twice in the first 2 weeks. The first call I let go to voicemail. She said she wasn't angry, she just wanted to talk. The second call I answered. We were on the phone for 40 minutes. She cried for part of it, which was hard. She apologized for the fork. That was the specific word she used, and it told me she had been thinking about it too. I told her I was not closing the door. I meant it. But I also told her I needed her to understand something. The woman she had in her guest room for 18 months, the woman who made casseroles nobody asked for and kept quiet when her husband wanted silence. That woman had done her best, but she was not who I was. I was someone who had a life and a home and a point of view, and if we were going to have a real relationship going forward, it had to include all of me. Not just the parts that were convenient. A long pause. Then she said, "I hear you, Mom." We made plans to have dinner in Asheville the following month, just the two of us. My son-in-law did not call. That was its own kind of answer, and I accepted it. In November, I met with Ms. Draper and finalized the last piece of the estate plan. I had set aside a portion of the inheritance in an education trust for my grandchildren, enough to cover college and graduate school without conditions, structured to pass to them regardless of anything that happened between me and their parents. It was not a reward. It was what grandmothers do when they have the means and the love. Those two things do not have to be in conflict. When I told my daughter, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "No," I said, "I wanted to." By December, I had a routine that was entirely my own. Coffee in the sunroom at 7. A walk on the trails before 9. Tuesdays at the community garden plot, where I had planted the same variety of yellow marigold Lou always kept along the back fence. A neighbor named Abe, retired from 30 years of teaching high school physics, stopped one afternoon to tell me that what I was doing with the marigolds was ambitious for the altitude, and then stayed 2 hours to help me work out the drainage. We have had dinner together 4 times since. He is good company the way quiet people are good company, unhurried and real. My grandchildren came in January for a long weekend. I was nervous, which I hadn't expected. My grandson found Lou's reading chair and claimed it for the entire visit with no discussion. My granddaughter asked if she could help in the garden and spent an hour outside in a jacket too thin for the cold, completely absorbed. On the last morning, she came to the kitchen table while I was reading and said, without looking up from her drawing, "I like it here, Grandma. It feels like yours." It does. It is. It took me 68 years and a letter from a dead brother and a son-in-law with a timeline to understand how much that matters. People ask whether I regret any of it, the months I stayed quiet in that guest room, the things I didn't say at dinners, whether I should have left sooner, pushed back harder. Roxanne asks, in her way. My daughter has asked too, more recently, now that we are finding our way back to each other. I don't spend much time in regret. It's expensive and the return is poor. What I know is this. Somewhere between that Friday night dinner and the Tuesday, I walked into an attorney's office. I stopped asking for permission to take up space. That was the real change. The inheritance was a door. But I had been standing at that door for 18 months, waiting for someone to open it from the other side. No one was going to open it. So I did it myself. If there is someone in your life who makes you feel like a problem to be managed, if you have been making yourself small to fit inside a life that was never quite yours, I want you to hear this. You are not too old and it is not too late. The thing you are most afraid of doing is probably the exact thing that gives you back to yourself. That is what I have learned, anyway. On a hillside in Asheville, in an apartment that smells like old wood and marigolds, with a bird feeder outside every window. What would you have done, sitting at that table? I genuinely want to know. Leave it in the comments. And if this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know how far a story can travel. Thank you for being here tonight. This is Lula, and I will see you in the next one.